I always thought betrayal would hit like a gunshot. Loud, violent, unmistakable. Turns out, it's more like a slow leak in a pipe. You don't notice it at first, just a few harmless drops. Then, one day, the ceiling caves in, and you're standing there, drenched, wondering how in the world you didn't see it coming. I was at the precinct when I first got the feeling, that gut punch of realization that something was off. My partner, Mike, was talking about a case. Some poor guy who found out his wife had been sneaking around behind his back. She thought she was slick. Mike laughed, sipping his coffee. Told her husband she was out of town for work. Meanwhile, she was holed up in some five-star hotel downtown with her sidekick. I froze mid-drink. Out of town for work. Five-star hotel. Downtown. My wife had told me the exact same thing 3 nights ago. I should have laughed it off. Should have dismissed the thought as paranoia. But I'm a cop. Suspicion isn't just a habit, it's a survival instinct. And something about the way Mike described it felt too darn familiar. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice casual. And the guy, the husband, what did he do? Mike shrugged. Nothing yet. He's a good guy. One of those love conquers all types. Thinks she'll come clean on her own. I smirked. That's his first mistake. Mike chuckled. You bet. If it were me, I'd make sure she regretted every second of it. I nodded, pretending to agree, but my mind was already running ahead, piecing things together. My wife had been distant lately, making excuses for late nights, smiling a little too much at her phone. And now this. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was a puzzle, and I had enough pieces to see the picture. I checked her work calendar first. No business trip. Then, our credit card statements. A charge for a hotel downtown, right on the night she was working late. Then, her phone. She didn't know I had a tracker on it. There it was. The same hotel. The same night. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat slow and steady. No anger. No heartbreak. Just cold, hard clarity. She was cheating. That much was clear. The real question was, what was I going to do about it? Most men would lose it. Scream, cry, beg. But I'm not most men. I'm a cop. And cops don't react. We investigate. We build cases. We gather evidence. We set traps. So I sat back, cracked my knuckles, and started planning. Not for revenge. Revenge is messy, emotional, unpredictable. I wanted something better. I wanted justice. The kind that doesn't just hurt, it leaves scars. The kind that doesn't end when the fight is over. The kind that sticks to your skin, that eats at you in the quiet moments, that turns your own children against you without a single lie being spoken. She thought she was smart. She thought she could lie to my face, kiss me goodbye, tuck our kids into bed, and slip away into the night to be with him. But she forgot who she was married to. She forgot that I've spent my whole life catching liars. And now, it was her turn to get caught. I used to think I had it all. A stable job, a loving wife, 2 amazing kids, and a home that felt like a sanctuary after long shifts at the precinct. Life wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Dependable. The kind of life a man could build something on. I'd wake up before dawn, kiss my wife on the forehead as she mumbled something sleepy, and head to work while the world was still quiet. My days were long, filled with reports, stakeouts, and the occasional high-speed chase, but I never complained. I had a purpose. I had a family waiting for me at home. Even after a tough shift, nothing beat coming through that front door and hearing my daughter yell, "Daddy's home," as she ran up to me, her little arms wrapping around my leg. My son, trying to play it cool at 10 years old, would just nod and say, "Hey, Dad," but I could see the excitement in his eyes. And my wife, she'd smile, the kind of smile that made the weight of the day melt away, and say, "Rough day?" I'd nod, drop my gear, and she'd hand me a cold beer before dinner. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Weekends were spent at the park, watching the kids play while we sat on the bench, her hand in mine, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes, when the kids were asleep, we'd sit out on the porch with a bottle of wine, just enjoying the silence together. She was my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone. Or at least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I can see the cracks. Little things I brushed off at the time, things that seemed harmless but now scream at me like warning signs I ignored. The way she started dressing a little nicer, even when she was just going to run errands. The way she'd glance at her phone and smile at messages she never shared. The late nights at work that became more frequent, the sudden interest in working out, the way she'd pull away just slightly when I kissed her. Tiny shifts. Barely noticeable then, but glaringly obvious now. I remember one evening, about a month before everything fell apart. We were watching a movie, something forgettable, just enjoying each other's company. Her phone buzzed. She reached for it fast, like she didn't want me to see. I raised an eyebrow, and she laughed. Just work. I let it go. Of course, I let it go. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We had years together, built on love, on trust, on shared struggles and victories. I thought we were unbreakable. I thought we were the exception. A cop's marriage isn't easy. The long hours, the stress, the constant exposure to the worst humanity has to offer, it takes a toll. But we made it work. Or at least, I did. Maybe she had stopped trying long before I noticed. Even when I started seeing the signs, I ignored them. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You tell yourself you're imagining things. That she's just tired, that work really has been stressful, that she still looks at you the way she used to. I convinced myself I was overthinking it, that my instincts that had never failed me in my entire career, were just off this time. Funny, isn't it? I could spot a liar from a mile away, read a suspect's body language like a book, but when it came to my own wife, I was blind. I think about the last perfect morning before I found out. The way she kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, made my coffee just the way I liked it. The kids were bickering over cereal, the dog was barking at the mailman, and I walked out the door feeling lucky. Feeling like a man who had everything he could ever want. And she let me. She let me walk out that door with a smile on my face, knowing full well she was already betraying me. That's what gets me the most. Not the act itself, but the ease with which she lied to me. The ease with which she played the role of the perfect wife, knowing that as soon as I was gone, she'd be in his arms. I was a fool, but not for long. It started with something small. Something so insignificant that on any other day, I would have brushed it off without a second thought. A late night. A quiet conversation behind a closed door. A hesitation in her voice when I asked her a simple question. The kind of thing that most people wouldn't even register, but for a man who spent years reading people, who can tell when someone is lying just by the way their eyes shift or their breathing changes, it was enough to set off a warning in the back of my mind. It was a Tuesday night, and I had gotten off my shift early. A rare thing. Usually, she'd be happy to see me home before midnight, greeting me with a tired smile and asking how my day had been. But this time, when I walked through the door, she looked startled, like I had caught her doing something she shouldn't. It lasted only a second, barely noticeable, but it was there. Her eyes widened just slightly before she forced a smile, smoothing a hand over her hair like she was composing herself. "You're home early," she said, her voice light, casual. Too casual. "Yeah, shift ended sooner than expected," I said, watching her reaction. Her phone was in her hand. The screen lit up for just a moment before she tilted it away from me, pressing the power button. Another tiny detail, but it stuck in my mind. She never used to do that. I walked into the kitchen, dropped my keys on the counter, and leaned against the fridge, watching her. She was standing near the dining table, one hand resting on the back of a chair, her body turned slightly away from me. Defensive posture. Like she was waiting for me to say something, waiting to see if I had noticed whatever it was she was trying to hide. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She nodded quickly. Too quickly. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." Another hesitation. A moment of silence stretching just a little too long before she spoke again. "How was work?" A deflection. Classic. I could recognize it instantly, but I played along. "Same as usual," I said, still watching her, still waiting to see if she'd let something slip. But she didn't. She just smiled, walked over, kissed me on the cheek, and said she was heading to bed. I let it go. For now. But something felt off. Something small, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But my gut was telling me to pay attention. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. She was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, her phone in her hand. When she saw me, she quickly put it down, face down on the table, and smiled. "You're up early," she said. I nodded, pouring myself a cup and sitting across from her. She looked tense. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But I trusted my instincts, and my instincts were telling me that something wasn't right. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced at her phone. A text notification popped up for just a second before the screen dimmed again. I couldn't see the name, just the first few words. "Can't stop thinking about last night." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I looked at her. She hadn't noticed that I'd seen it. She was staring at her cup, lost in thought, probably debating whether to say something, probably wondering if I had caught on yet. I could have asked her right then and there. I could have reached across the table, picked up her phone, and demanded an explanation. But that's not how I operate. That's not how you get the truth. You don't accuse. You observe. You let them think they're safe. You let them think they're in control. So I said nothing. I finished my coffee, kissed her on the forehead like I always did, and got ready for work. But as I walked out that door, I knew one thing for sure. She was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. I stopped believing in coincidences the moment I saw that text message. Can't stop thinking about last night. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That wasn't a wrong number or a work message. That was a clear, undeniable sign that something was happening behind my back. But instead of confronting her, instead of demanding answers that she would just lie about, I did what I do best. I started building my case. A cop doesn't move on a hunch. A cop collects evidence, builds a solid foundation before making a move. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I began with the basics. First, her phone. She had always been careless with it, leaving it on the counter, tossing it onto the couch without a second thought. But now, it was always with her. Always face down, always locked. I tested it once, picking it up casually while she was in the shower, just to check the time. The moment she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her eyes darted to my hand, and for the briefest second, I saw panic. Looking for something, she asked, forcing a smile. I held up the phone, just checking the time. She laughed, too loud, too forced. Well, maybe try the clock next time. I handed it back without a word, but that reaction told me everything. She had something to hide. Next, her routine. She used to be predictable, mornings spent scrolling through news on her phone, evenings cooking dinner while chatting about her day. Now, there were changes. Sudden errands, late nights at work, gym sessions that conveniently lined up with the nights I was working overtime. I started checking her location through the family sharing app on her phone. A week ago, she had been at work late. That's what she told me. But according to her phone, she was nowhere near her office. She was across town, near a hotel. I didn't say anything, just took a screenshot. Passwords were next. She had changed them. All of them. Bank accounts, email, even her social media. That was new. She had never cared before, never thought twice about logging in from my phone if hers was charging. But now, every device required a new password, one I wasn't given. I tested the waters one night, casually mentioning that I wanted to order something from her Amazon account, since we shared the Prime membership. Oh, she said, looking up from her phone, I actually changed the password last week. I'll log in for you later. There was no reason for that. No reason at all. But I didn't press. I just nodded, storing that detail away. Then, there were the phone calls. She started taking them in private, stepping out of the room when she never used to care before. One night, I walked into the bedroom, and she was sitting on the bed, whispering into her phone. The moment she saw me, she ended the call and put the phone down. Who was that? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She hesitated. Just a half-second too long. Just Lisa, she said, naming one of her friends. I looked at her, let the silence stretch, then nodded. She looked relieved, like she had just passed some kind of test. But she hadn't. She had just given me another piece of the puzzle. By now, I knew. I didn't have proof, not enough to confront her outright. But I knew. A man feels it when his wife pulls away, when the warmth that used to be natural is suddenly forced. She was slipping away, and she thought I hadn't noticed. She thought she was outsmarting me. But she forgot one thing. I catch liars for a living. And if she wanted to play this game, then fine. I'd play. I'd play better. I knew she was cheating long before I had proof. The late nights, the hidden phone, the lies that didn't quite fit. But knowing and knowing are two different things. Suspicion is a whisper, but proof? Proof is a gunshot. And when the proof came, it hit me like a bullet to the chest, quick, brutal, and irreversible. It was a Thursday night when I finally got what I needed. I was supposed to be on a late shift, but I had swapped with a guy at the station. She didn't know. She thought I was at work, just like every other night she had been doing whatever she was doing behind my back. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat in my car a few blocks away, watching, waiting. Her car was still in the driveway, the house dark except for the glow from the living room window. Normal. Routine. But I knew better than to take things at face value. I checked my phone, Opened the tracking app she didn't know I had access to. Her location was bouncing. First at home, then gone, then back again. A glitch? No. A car service. Someone picking her up, someone dropping her off. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I checked our shared bank account, something I had started doing religiously since the first seed of doubt was planted. And there it was. A charge from a high-end hotel downtown. The same one she had been near last week. A date, a timestamp, a receipt that left no room for doubt. Still, I needed more. My cop instincts told me never to move without absolute certainty, and I wasn't about to give her the chance to worm her way out of this. So I did what any detective would do. I checked the surveillance. The hotel had public cameras near the valet, and I knew exactly where to look. A quick call to an old friend, a favor cashed in, and 10 minutes later, I had access. I sat in my car, heart hammering, as I fast-forwarded through the footage from that night. And there she was, stepping out of a car, dressed nicer than she ever did for me, smiling, laughing, and then him. Some guy, mid-30s, suit perfectly tailored, the kind of jerk who thinks he's untouchable. He placed a hand on the small of her back, leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and she let him. No hesitation, no guilt, no second-guessing. She just let him, and then they walked into the hotel together, arm in arm. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles cracked. There it was. The truth, raw and undeniable, playing out on a grainy screen in front of me. I felt nothing at first. No explosion of rage, no heartbreak, just a deep, cold certainty settling into my bones. She was cheating, and she had been for a while. I took a breath, exhaled slow. No panic, no confrontation. Not yet. A man who reacts with emotion is a man who loses control, and I wasn't about to lose anything. I was going to be careful. I was going to be smart. And most importantly, I was going to make sure she felt this. I closed the footage, checked the time. She was home now, probably sitting on the couch like nothing had happened, probably waiting for me to call and say goodnight like I always did. But not tonight. Tonight, I was done playing the fool. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the dark windows of my house, my mind working like a machine. No anger, no grief, just cold, calculated precision. She thought she had won. She thought she was untouchable, slipping away into the night with her lover, laughing behind my back while I worked overtime to provide for our family. But what she didn't know, what she could never have predicted, was that I wasn't the kind of man who let things slide. I wasn't the type to cry, to beg, to plead for an explanation. No, I was something much worse. I was a man who knew how to wait, how to plan, how to strike when the target was at its most vulnerable. And she had no idea that her entire world was about to collapse. I thought about all the ways I could go about it. Exposing her publicly? Too easy. Destroying her financially? Too impersonal. Ruining her reputation? That would come naturally. No, what I wanted was something far more devastating. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own actions, to watch as everything she had built crumbled in her hands, knowing she had no one to blame but herself. And I wanted it to be slow, methodical, a revelation that crept up on her piece by piece, so that by the time she realized what was happening, it would already be too late. The first step was simple. Distance. I stopped touching her, stopped looking at her the way I used to. No more playful remarks, no more goodnight kisses, no more small moments of affection that she had taken for granted. I wanted her to feel the shift, to notice that something was wrong, but not enough to raise alarms. Just enough to plant the seed of doubt in her mind. I knew her. I knew that if she thought something was off, she'd try to investigate, try to figure out what had changed. And that was exactly what I wanted. Next came the financials. She had been relying on me for stability, for the comfortable life she had grown accustomed to. That was about to change. Quietly, I began moving assets, shifting funds, redirecting deposits so that when the time came, she wouldn't have a safety net to fall back on. She didn't notice at first. Why would she? I had always handled the finances, always made sure the bills were paid, the accounts were full. She had no reason to suspect that in just a matter of weeks, her comfortable life would become very, very uncomfortable. But the real masterpiece? That was the moment the truth would hit her. Not all at once, not in some dramatic explosion of rage and accusations, but in a slow, creeping horror as she realized that she had lost everything. That moment would come when she saw the children turn away from her, when she heard the whispers behind her back, when she reached out for help and found nothing but cold indifference. Because the final stage of my plan wasn't about me. It was about them, our kids. She thought she could have it all, the family, the stability, and the affair. She thought she could keep them separate, compartmentalized, untouched by her betrayal. But she forgot something important. Children aren't blind. They see. They hear. And when the truth finally comes out, when they realize who their mother really is, that's when she'll feel the real weight of her choices. Not because I told them. I wouldn't have to. The truth always finds a way to surface. And when it does, when she sees the looks of disappointment, of quiet rejection in their eyes, that will be the final nail in her coffin. Because losing me? That she could handle. Losing them? That would destroy her. I sat there, staring at the house that was no longer a home, feeling nothing but quiet satisfaction. She thought she had been playing a game. She didn't realize that she had already lost. I spent weeks setting the stage, weaving the trap so delicately that she never saw it coming. Every move I made was calculated, every step designed to lead her exactly where I wanted. She thought she was still in control, still balancing her double life without a single consequence. But she had no idea that her world was already crumbling beneath her feet. The first phase of my plan was simple: patience. I didn't change overnight. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I withdrew in increments, just enough for her to notice, but not enough to cause suspicion. I stopped asking about her day, stopped showing interest in the little things, stopped initiating any kind of affection. She started reaching for me more, touching my arm, trying to bridge the gap she didn't understand. It was almost amusing. She had no idea that I was already miles ahead of her. Then, the financials. I made sure the accounts she relied on suddenly had unexpected issues. A declined card here, a missing deposit there. She'd bring it up casually, frowning at her phone. "Babe, do you know why the mortgage payment didn't go through?" I'd feign concern, tell her I'd look into it, then watch as she tried to mask her frustration. She was so used to stability, so used to me handling everything, that even small disruptions unsettled her. But that was just the beginning. I had planned the final strike for a night she would never forget. An anniversary dinner, something she would never suspect. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger, thought that whatever distance she had felt lately would be smoothed over with good wine and soft apologies. She had no idea that this dinner wasn't for us. It was for her reckoning. I made reservations at one of the finest restaurants in town, the kind of place we rarely went to because I had always been practical with money. When she saw the location, her face lit up. "Wow, you really went all out," she said, slipping her hand into mine as we walked inside. She thought this was a reconciliation. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I had everything timed to perfection. The moment we sat down, I sent a quick message. A simple confirmation. Then, I watched her, sipping my drink as she talked about nothing, about how things had felt off between us lately, about how she was glad we were taking time to reconnect. She was spinning the narrative in her favor, laying the groundwork for whatever excuse she planned to use if I ever confronted her. But she never got the chance. Because at that moment, the doors to the private dining section opened, and out walked her lover. She didn't notice at first. She was too busy trying to weave her little lies. But when he stopped near our table, she froze. The color drained from her face, her eyes darting from me to him and back again, like her brain couldn't process what was happening. And then, to make sure there was no way out, I stood up, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. The screen lit up with photos, messages, timestamped locations. Everything. Every lie, every meeting, every moment she thought she had gotten away with. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. The restaurant was quiet now. People were starting to notice. A few whispered, a few stole glances. And she sat there, her hands trembling, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for something, anything, that could undo what had just happened. But there was nothing. She turned to him, as if expecting some kind of lifeline, some reassurance that this wasn't as bad as it seemed. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. Because what she didn't know, what she had never even considered, was that I had gone one step further. I had reached out to his wife. And now, standing at the entrance, was another woman. A woman who had just learned that her husband had been cheating. A woman who was staring at my wife with the same mix of fury and betrayal that I had once felt. It was over. My wife's mouth opened again, but no words came out. She knew she was trapped. No lies, no excuses, no charming manipulation could save her now. The weight of it all crashed down in real time. and I watched as she finally understood. I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "You thought I didn't know?" I said, my tone calm, even. "You thought you could have it all. But the thing about lies? They always catch up to you." I stood up, dropped a few bills on the table, and walked away. Not in anger, not in heartbreak, just in satisfaction. She had played her game. Now, she had to live with the consequences. She sat there frozen, eyes wide, breath shallow, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The world she had built, her careful web of lies, her perfectly crafted double life, was unraveling in front of her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I can see it in the way her lips trembled, the way her eyes darted around the restaurant, looking for some escape, some way to undo what had just happened. But there was none. The damage was already done. Her lover's wife was still standing at the entrance, staring, her expression shifting between shock and fury. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of us, a suffocating silence stretching across the table as my wife's breath came faster, more erratic. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't what you think," a classic line. The last desperate attempt to control the narrative. But I had no interest in playing along. I leaned back in my chair, watching her struggle for words, waiting for whatever excuse she was scrambling to put together. I wanted her to feel this. The helplessness. The cold grip of reality sinking in. I wanted her to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that there was no talking her way out of this. Her eyes flicked back to her lover, silently begging him to say something to fix this. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his wife, who had begun to walk toward the table, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown to his downfall. His face had lost all color, his body rigid, bracing for impact. He opened his mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to beg, but his wife didn't give him the chance. "How long?" she asked, her voice steady, cold. He hesitated, and that was all she needed. She already knew the answer. My wife flinched, as if realizing for the first time that this wasn't just about me exposing her. She had dragged another family into this. Another woman. Another set of children who would go home tonight with a father who had betrayed them. And now, for the first time since I had started pulling the strings, she wasn't in control. "I can explain," she whispered, this time to me. But I shook my head, my voice calm, unshaken. "No, you can't." Her hands reached for mine across the table, but I didn't move. The rejection hit her harder than anything else. She had expected anger, maybe even shouting. She had been prepared for a fight. But this? The quiet, the finality, the absolute certainty in my voice. This was what broke her. "Please," she tried again, her voice cracking. "Let's just talk." I tilted my head slightly, as if considering it. "Like how you talked to me every night after coming back from him. Like how you kissed me, smiled at me, told me you loved me while lying straight to my face." She opened her mouth, then closed it, because she knew she had no defense. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, but the words felt weak, pathetic. "When?" I asked. "When it all fell apart. When he left you. When I was already gone." Silence. I gave her a long, measured look, then exhaled, shaking my head slightly. "No, you weren't. You were never going to tell me. You were going to let me keep loving you while you loved someone else." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. Not the quiet, graceful tears of someone with dignity, but the panicked, uncontrolled sobbing of someone who realizes they've lost everything. "It was a mistake," she choked out. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I studied her for a moment, then gave the smallest of smirks. Funny. It looked pretty intentional to me. She buried her face in her hands, but I wasn't done. The best was yet to come. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers, and placed them on the table between us. Her eyes flicked to them, confusion cutting through her tears. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Divorce papers," I said simply. "Already signed. Everything's in order. You won't get the house. You won't get the savings. In full custody? Well, that'll be up to the kids. But I have a feeling they won't want to stay with you once they find out the truth." The blood drained from her face. This was it. The moment she realized just how deep she had dug her own grave. "You wouldn't," she whispered, but we both knew that was a lie. "You think I haven't been preparing for this? You think I haven't been documenting every single lie? Every single time you slipped up? Every single moment you thought you got away with it?" I shook my head. "You underestimated me. That was your first mistake. Thinking I would forgive you? That was your last." Her breathing hitched, a strangled sob escaping her lips as she looked around, as if someone, anyone would come to her rescue. But there was no one. Not her lover, who was still standing frozen as his own marriage fell apart before his eyes. Not the other patrons, who were now openly staring, whispering, witnessing her fall from grace in real time. She was alone, and she knew it. I pushed back my chair, standing up, buttoning my jacket with the same calm I had walked in with. "You wanted a different life," I said, my voice low, final. "Well, now you have one. Enjoy it." And then I walked away. I didn't turn back. I didn't wait for more tears, more excuses, more desperate pleas. She had made her choices. Now, she had to live with them. The fallout was immediate and devastating. She had spent so much time perfecting her deception, so much effort crafting her double life, but the moment the truth was exposed, everything she had built came crashing down in ways she never anticipated. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg, and I didn't need to destroy her. She did that all on her own. All I did was light the fuse and step back to watch it burn. By the time I got home that night, she was already calling me. I let it ring. Then another call. And another. Then came the messages, long, desperate walls of text begging me to talk to her, to listen, to give her a chance to explain. I didn't even open them. She had her moment to talk when she was sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and sharing a bed with another man. That was when she should have thought about explanations. Now, she had nothing left but silence. The next morning, she came home, or at least, she tried to. Her key didn't work. I had changed the locks while she was still sitting in that restaurant, humiliated, her perfect world shattering around her. The security cameras I installed showed her standing at the door, trying to handle, knocking, calling my name. Then the realization hit. She had no home here anymore. She had nowhere to go. Her lover? He wasn't an option. His wife had been far less composed than I was, and from what I later heard, she had thrown all his belongings out onto the street before the night was over. He had lost everything, his family, his reputation, even his job. Turns out, sneaking around with another man's wife when you hold a high-ranking corporate position isn't the best career move when that man happens to have friends in the right places. He was fired within a week. I never had to lift a finger. As for my wife, or rather, my ex-wife, she lost more than just me. The moment the truth came out, her carefully curated image crumbled. Her friends, the ones she used to gossip with, the ones she laughed with over drinks, turned their backs on her. It's funny how quickly people abandon you when they realize the person they trusted isn't who they thought she was. She tried reaching out to them, but the replies were cold, distant. They weren't interested in hearing her side of the story. They had already seen enough. Then came the kids. I never had to tell them what happened. Children aren't stupid. They see, they hear, they understand far more than we give them credit for. And when their mother went from being a constant in their lives to a stranger on the other end of a phone call, they didn't ask why. They already knew. The first time she tried to pick them up for her scheduled visitation, my son refused to go. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face a mask of quiet anger. "I don't want to see you," he said. She tried to reason with him, to tell him she was still his mother, but he just shook his head. "You lied," he told her. And that was it. That was all he needed to say. My daughter followed his lead. She was younger, and I thought maybe she would be more forgiving, but children have a way of sensing sincerity. And she knew. She saw through the fake smiles, the forced apologies. When her mother called, she answered in short, clipped sentences. When she asked to see her, she found excuses. And when she finally broke down and told her she missed her, my daughter simply said, "Then why did you leave us?" I didn't gloat. I didn't feed them stories or turn them against her. I didn't need to. She did that all on her own. The greatest punishment wasn't losing me, it was losing them. As for me, I thrived. I moved on. The divorce was finalized within months, and she walked away with nothing but the clothes she packed the night she left. The house, the accounts, the stability she had taken for granted, it was all gone. She tried to rebuild, but it wasn't easy. The job she once had, the career she was so proud of, suffered when word got out. Colleagues distanced themselves. Professional relationships soured. She found herself alone, struggling to regain the life she had so carelessly thrown away. I saw her once, months later. She looked different. The confidence was gone, the arrogance replaced with something else, something hollow. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but I just nodded and kept walking. There was nothing left to say. She thought she had control. She thought she could balance her lies and her reality without consequences. But she forgot one simple truth: actions have consequences, And the moment you betray the people who truly love you, you've already lost. And I never lost anything at all. I walked away from the wreckage with my head held high, with my dignity intact, and with a life that was better, stronger, and completely free of her. She thought she could break me. Instead, she broke herself. Looking back, I realized she never really understood what she lost. Not at first. Not when I walked away from that restaurant. Not when she found herself locked out of the home we built together. Not even when the divorce papers landed in her hands. She still thought she had options. Still thought she could salvage something. But it wasn't until she stood in front of our children, begging for their forgiveness, and they met her with silence, that was the moment it hit her. That was when she truly understood what she had done. Not to me. To them. And by then, it was far too late. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just destroy a relationship. It erases the version of you that once existed in someone's mind. The woman I loved, the one I built a life with, the one I trusted with everything, she was gone. Replaced by a stranger. A liar. A woman who smiled in my face while sneaking around with someone else. And there was no coming back from that. Not for her. Not for us. Not for anything. And yet, even after everything, she still tried. Weeks turned to months, and the calls kept coming. Sometimes, they were desperate, pleased to talk, to listen, to try again. Other times, they were angry, accusations that I had turned the kids against her, that I had ruined her life, that I was punishing her unfairly. As if she had never once stopped to consider that she had done this to herself. As if she thought she was entitled to forgiveness, to redemption, simply because she wanted it. But life doesn't work that way. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal because the person who shattered it suddenly regrets their actions. And love? Love doesn't survive in the shadow of betrayal. It dies there, cold and unceremonious. So I never answered. Never gave her the satisfaction of a conversation, of closure, of anything that might make her feel like she still had some claim over my life. She lost that right the moment she made her choice. And I moved on. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just with certainty. Certainty that I had done the right thing. Certainty that I had walked away with my dignity intact, with my children by my side, and with a life free of her lies. They say the best revenge is living well, and I believe that now more than ever. Because while she sat in the wreckage of her own choices, I built something better. I found happiness again, not in replacing her, but in realizing that I never needed her to begin with. I was always stronger than she thought, always smarter than she gave me credit for. And in the end, I was the one who walked away unscathed. She, on the other hand, would have to live with the consequences of her betrayal for the rest of her life. So tell me, if you were in my position, if you had uncovered the same betrayal, if you had held the same evidence in your hands, knowing what I did, knowing how I made sure she felt every ounce of what she had done, would you have done the same? Or would you have given her a chance to explain? A chance to make things right? A chance to lie to you one last time?